In the history of war, there are some victories that just shouldn't have happened. Today, we're going back to 1098, to a dusty plain in what's now Turkey, to pull apart one of the most unbelievable wins of the First Crusade, the Battle of Antioch. It's a fight that on paper was completely unwinnable, which brings us to a terrifying question. And that's the exact question the Crusader army was facing. I mean, they'd just been through this brutal 8-month siege, and finally took the city of Antioch. But that victory, it turned into a trap. Almost immediately, a massive Muslim relief army showed up, and just like that, the winners became the besieged, facing total annihilation. Let's be clear, the odds were, well, they were impossible. Inside the walls, you've got the Crusaders, and they are on their last legs, starving, sick, and their number one weapon, the heavy cavalry charge, was basically useless. They had fewer than 200 horses left, and even those were weak. Outside, Kerbogha, the governor of Mosul, is sitting there with a well-fed, well-supplied army more than double their size. This wasn't supposed to be a battle. It was supposed to be a slaughter. So, how on earth did they pull it off? In this explainer, we're going to start by setting the scene of this impossible siege. Then, we'll dig into the 4 key factors that made this victory happen: leadership and its rivalries, the enemy being a house divided, the raw power of faith, and the crucial role of betrayal. And then, we'll reach our final verdict on this so-called miracle. Okay, so let's really paint the picture here. The Crusaders storm into Antioch on June 3rd, 1098, and they unleash 8 months of pure, pent-up frustration. But that feeling of triumph, it lasted for about 5 minutes. Within days, Kerbogha's army rolls up and slams the doors shut, trapping him in the very city they just fought so hard to conquer. You have to understand, the situation was beyond desperate. The Crusaders were caught in a vice. Inside the city, the citadel was still held by Muslim forces, a hostile fortress right in their backyard. And outside, Kerbogha's army stretched as far as the eye could see. Food was gone. I mean, we have sources telling us that men were literally bleeding their few remaining horses just to have something to drink. Morale was so low that even huge figures like Peter the Hermit tried to sneak away in desert. This was rock bottom. Now, in a mess like this, everything comes down to leadership. So our first factor is exactly that. Did some brilliant Christian commander just snatch victory from the jaws of defeat? Well, it's complicated. You see, the Crusader command was basically split between 2 incredibly powerful, ambitious guys who did not get along. On one side, you have Bohemond of Toronto, a super cunning, pragmatic Norman warrior who saw the Crusade as his ticket to getting his own kingdom. He's the one who made a secret deal to get the Crusaders inside Antioch. And on the other side, you have Raymond of Toulouse, one of the richest lords on the whole Crusade, deeply religious but also incredibly proud. He thought he should be in charge, and their bickering, it nearly paralyzed the entire army. And yet, when the chips were down, Bohemond proved he was a military genius. As the historian Thomas Asbridge puts it, with their cavalry basically gone, the Crusaders couldn't fight their usual way. Bohemond was the guy who realized this and reshaped the entire army into a fearsome infantry force. He created a whole new weapon perfect for their desperate situation. His battle plan for the breakout was absolutely essential. But let's not get carried away here. We can't give all the credit to leadership. The truth is, the command structure was a total mess. That constant fighting between Bohemond and Raymond nearly wrecked the whole thing. And the fact that famous leaders were trying to desert, that tells you this command was hanging on by a thread. Okay, so the Christian leadership was a mixed bag, to say the least. But what about their opponents? Let's flip the coin and look at our second factor, the disunity inside that massive Muslim army. And this is huge, because a Muslim source, the chronicler Ibn al-Athir, gives us the inside scoop. Kerbogha was not a popular guy. He was arrogant, he looked down on his allied commanders, and they hated him for it. This wasn't some unified, loyal army. It was a shaky coalition of rivals who, according to al-Athir, were already secretly planning to ditch him if a real battle broke out. And this arrogance, it led to a colossal mistake. As the starving Crusaders started shuffling out of the city gates, one by one, over this tiny bridge, Kerbogha had the perfect chance to pick them off. He could have destroyed them right there. But he reportedly told his commanders to wait. He wanted them all to come out so he could crush them in one big, glorious battle for himself. That single arrogant decision gave Bohemond the time he desperately needed to get his army into formation. Still, let's not pretend this was the only reason they won. Even with all that infighting, Kerbogha's army was gigantic, battle-tested, and still vastly outnumbered the Crusaders. On any normal day, they should have wiped the floor with the Franks. Their squabbles definitely cracked the door open, but the Crusaders still had to find the strength to kick it down. And that brings us to the part of the story you've probably been waiting for, our third factor: the incredible, game-changing power of faith and the discovery of a certain holy relic. So in the absolute darkest days of the siege, with everyone starving and giving up, this poor peasant pilgrim, Peter Bartholomew, starts saying he's having visions of St. Andrew, and the saint, he claims, told him where the Holy Lance, the spear that pierced Christ's side on the cross, was hidden, right there, under a church floor in Antioch. So on June 14th, they start digging, and they find a piece of metal. The effect was like a bolt of lightning through the army. And you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to what the Crusader leaders themselves wrote in a letter to the Pope. They said the discovery transformed the men. Guys who were literally too weak from hunger to even walk were suddenly filled with the strength and the will to fight. They weren't a starving mob anymore. They were God's army, and they had a sign to prove it. But of course, it's not that simple. Not everyone bought it. The Pope's own guy on the Crusades, Bishop Adhemar of Lipui, was apparently very skeptical that this was the real deal. And remember, this massive wave of faith only came after weeks of total despair and desertions. So while faith was an incredible motivator, it wasn't a magic wand that could just erase the reality of starvation. All right, on to our last big piece of the puzzle, the tangled web of alliances and backstabbing that defined this whole campaign. First things first, the Crusaders never would have even gotten inside Antioch without a huge betrayal. A tower commander inside the city, a guy named Firuz, cut a deal with Bohemond and let his men climb up the walls. But there was another, equally important betrayal, this time from an ally. The Byzantine general Tatisius had actually deserted the crusade months earlier. Bohemond used this as the perfect political excuse, arguing that the Byzantines had given up their claim to Antioch, which meant he could have it for himself. And you can just feel the bitterness in the Crusader accounts. The Gesta Francorum, which is one of our best eyewitness sources, doesn't pull any punches. It flat out calls Tatisius a liar. It just goes to show you how deep the mistrust between the Western Crusaders and their supposed Byzantine allies had become. But here's the key thing to remember about this factor. Betrayal got the Crusaders into the city, but it did absolutely nothing to help them in that final pitched battle outside the city against Kerbogha. When they marched out of those gates to face that giant army, they were completely, totally on their own. Okay, let's put it all on the table. We've looked at the four big arguments: Christian leadership, Muslim disunity, religious zeal, and the role of allies in betrayal. So now, let's bring it all together and figure this out. The truth is, there is no single easy answer. Not one of these factors explains the victory by itself. Bohemond's brilliant tactics would have meant nothing if his men didn't have the morale from the Holy Lands to actually fight. But that morale boost might not have been enough if Kerbogha hadn't made that critical, arrogant mistake. And that mistake, it happened because his own army was ready to betray him. It was a perfect storm, where every single one of these pieces had to fall into place at exactly the right moment. Which leaves us with the big question. What was the victory at Antioch, really? Was it a genuine miracle, a sign from God? Was it the result of one man's tactical brilliance? Or was it just what happens when a fragile, arrogant coalition runs up against a desperate, fanatical army with absolutely nothing left to lose? The real answer, it seems, isn't about picking just one of those, but about understanding how all of them came crashing together in one impossible moment on a battlefield in 1098.